Okay.
My name is Giorgio Jackson. I'm from Chile. I was elected an MP in the recent elections on the district of Santiago. And as a profession, I'm an engineer on IT. Our country was, in the 80s, one laboratory for the neoliberalism reforms that was promoted by Milton Friedman in the Chicago Economy School. So we were actually a laboratory for that. And the second thing that was introduced in the 80s in Chile was a very market-oriented educational system. So the competition between schools for the parents to have a school choice, a free choice, is the core value that is in our current system. The demonstrations in 2011 were not only about the education. We were a union, a student union, and then we became, with the support of workers and other, part of society, we became as a social movement. People started to feel that the decisions that we are making, that the politicians are making, are not the same that they will make. So I think that it's a lot of paradigms that are now collapsed, and we're trying to build a new one. Education today in Chile is not for all the students free in primary and secondary system. So the minimum is to provide free education without discrimination to all the people in Chile. And that's quite a structural change for understanding education as a right, not as a consumption good. And that's one of the core of the mobilizations in 2011. If in your country are trying to implement those kinds of reforms, just look at Chile, not the average number, please. Make a double click and look at the consequences underneath the average results. The consequences on segregation, the consequences on inequalities are huge and are more invisible in the first insight. But for our country had made a different way the people relate each other, because people grow in different parts and people doesn't understand each other, and it's a good example of how not to do things if you don't want segregation. How are we teaching? What do we teach? What is quality? What is education for in the 21st century? That are the kind of questions that we need to answer for being able to give our children, our next generation, the vanguard of the critical thinking for the 21st century in a global, not only economy, in a global world. And I think that question about what we teach today has a very structured answer. We teach what is useful for the labor market, and we don't teach anything else. And I think that that's a very reductive way of thinking about education, about how we transpass our culture that is, I don't know how many years, how we have built the current culture. And we are now reducing it only to skills for the labor market. I think that this is a very bad idea of transpassing culture to our children. The other that is very related by this is that education should be not seen as a business for the corporates. Corporates can act in many ways of the economies, but shouldn't be on education. And that's one national consensus about not having profit on the educational institutions. One of the ensurement that governments should do about education is to strengthen the public education, because the public education is one place when you can really transpass, if you have not a political agenda, a partisan political agenda on the education, but because there are countries that also have. But if you have a really public, Republican educational system, you can preserve those values that your culture wants to transpass to the next generations. We have a program on our movement that is called 60 Revoluciones en Educación. That's mean 60 revolutions on our educational system. And it's based basically in these different areas that we talked about: infrastructure, incentives, what are we teaching, why are we teaching. And I think that that's one of the most, for us, is like a manifesto for the goals that we want to achieve in the short and medium and long term in education. Our generation was born in a moment that was the end of the Cold War, just in the end of the Cold War. We were raised in the times that technological improvements have been exponentially being executed. And we are now also part of a society that can speak globally because of the internet. So I think that we have this kind of global behavior. I mean, for example, in 2011, there was the man of the year was the protester in the Time magazine. So if you look at that symbolic issue, it's not that all the problems that the country has is the same or the demand is global, no. But I think that we are now trying to push more horizontal societies in all the way of the world, not only economically, that was, for example, the Occupy Wall Street, not only in opportunities, that was educational movement in Chile, and not only in democratic process, as was the Arab Spring, or maybe the one in the Spain Indignados was the three of these subjects. So it's more about how it concentrates the power in the different areas of influence of our societies, and we as generation don't want to contribute on that concentration, but we want the otherwise. We want to deconcentrate that power into more kind of people. The process that we're making now in politics are the 19th century way of doing politics. We have not changed the way that people interact with the political system. And the internet revolution has not been traduced yet into the political change of doing things. So I think that that's one of the challenge for having more horizontal, more participative, more interconnected way of doing politics, and not only binomial, and not only two coalitions that confront themselves as the normal parliaments. It's more liquid, as the pirate in Germany says. It's a little more uncertain way of doing politics. And today, many politicians are afraid of this change of the logic of the paradigm of having relationship with their constituents. It's a democracy 2 or 3.0, and today we have a democracy 1.0. It's only paper and a pen. What does it mean to have an open society? It's a question that we should always be being questioned ourselves. And today the answer for the mainstream answer for that question of an open society is a world trade open society. I mean, and I don't think that's the answer. An open society is also open to the migration. It's also open to new ways of looking the relationship between people. It's open society is one that is not conservative by definition. So I think that in Chile, the risk of having a closed society, not an open society, is the status quo. If we maintain the structure, I mean, very segregated, very unequal society as it's the natural way of thinking the life, I think that we will be never an open society.